Welcome back, everyone. Joining me now for the interview is Dr. Anna Stratis. She worked in New York during the disastrous time of the pandemic, when people were dying at alarming rates, and she's joining me now once again. Dr. Stratis, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks, Jeremiah. It's great to be back.
So we learned earlier last week that the president was infected with COVID-19, and when the president returned to the White House, the first thing that he did was take off his mask. The president only stayed at Walter Reed for 3 days. Are you concerned that the president was not taking this seriously and wanting to rush this for political benefit?
Absolutely. And it's disgusting. It's horrifying. It's just absolutely disastrous what has played out.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Complete disregard, not only for the health, he's sending a very strong message because he is the commander in chief. People look to his advice, unfortunately. And he has just continued to expose people in the White House administration. And again, it's not going to be the people who are sort of the high paid celebrities around him. It's going to be the staffers, the people
Mhm.
who are trying to work hard to build their career that are exposed. They're exposing their families. It's
The president could have used this moment to become more sympathetic and change his leadership on the pandemic, but that did not happen. Are you concerned that if other people catch the coronavirus, potentially his supporters, are you concerned that they will not take this seriously as a form of follow the leader?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's not a matter of when you catch it that you won't take it seriously. The thing is we have to prevent the spread and we have to prevent folks who are vulnerable to complications of COVID from getting COVID.
Mhm.
So absolutely, just the view that, masks are for weak people is something that he's further perpetuated. And it's absolutely horrible that, and again, my concern is not for the wealthy person who has underlying good health status, right? In
Mhm.
the caste system of the United States, the people who have consistently been the underdog and have been oppressed and discriminated against, those are the people that I fear for.
Mhm. We are now looking at cases rise in multiple states. In Oregon, cases are rising exponentially. In New Mexico, the governor is saying that this could potentially become the new epicenter. Also, we are watching in New York right now, cases continue to rise. How will we know when New York has hit its second wave?
Oh man, I know, and that breaks my heart because,
Mhm.
just the thousands of people were dying every day in New York. Um, I the only thing I can say is that yes, we may be hitting our second wave even now.
Mm.
I will say though that our leadership in the state with Governor Cuomo, if we're going to have a second wave, like even we're having up in Canada with in New York, in Ontario and Quebec, there are second waves hitting there too. It's what leadership do you have at the helm through that second wave? So
Mhm.
it breaks my heart to think that New York is going to be battered again. And of course, again, it's always going to be those neighborhoods, those zip codes that are already disadvantaged. They already have overcrowding and poor socioeconomic status. But if there's one saving grace, it is that the governor is going to be sensible and reasonable in terms of curtailing the things that need to be curtailed. And
Mhm.
specifically, again, not necessarily pulling kids out of school, but limiting all of the social gatherings that don't relate necessarily to children, that are these
Yes.
super spreader events. And I feel like the governor is going to be really tough and firm on us and just keep us going in one message.
According to new news reporting by NBC News, the New York is now firing up a potentially a $15,000 fine for COVID violations. Do you think this will help enforce and help people? Not sort of. Do you think that this will be an effective measure in getting people to stay home?
$15,000 is a lot. As a resident of New York City, I think, oh my gosh, how on earth do you like enforce that?
Mhm.
I think, to be honest, I don't think fines are it. I think at the end of the day, it is that people are looking for a consistent message.
Mhm.
It's not the stick that's going to help folks, it's the carrot. I think it's the just everybody being unified behind one message, a sensible public health message that really calls to our sense of community with other people.
Mm.
Um, so, I mean, fines, nah, I think we have to be reminded on a daily basis what we're all doing this for.
Mhm.
I think that speaks stronger than any fines, personally.
As the president was downplaying the first wave of the coronavirus, there was just people all over the United States dying, not just regular American citizens, but we had lots of medical workers die. Yesterday, I believe this was yesterday, a Texas doctor died. She was 28 years old. One person saying, quote, she wore the same mask for weeks, if not months, end quote. Are you concerned
Yeah.
that when states individually hit their second wave, are you concerned that we will not have enough medical workers to assist the COVID patients?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny, I remember reusing my mask in April.
Mhm,
And unfortunately, I don't think anything has been put in PPE. Yeah, I worry about that. I worry too, like in April, we had in New York City hundreds or thousands of medical workers who are flooding in from all parts of the country to help.
mhm,
My worry is not necessarily that folks will have died off, but there will be fatigue and mistrust and burnout among
mhm,
healthcare workers because the message from the commander in chief is we don't care about you, we're not going to protect you, and your work is not valuable. So I think that's what essential workers have walked away from. They don't believe that Trump and his allies and everybody who votes for him really cares.
mhm,
So my worry is that in the second wave, a lot of medical workers will stay home.
mm. Um,
Burnout is my concern.
Dr. Anthony Fauci said just earlier this week that the United States could potentially hit, excuse me, the CDC, I believe it's the CDC that said the
Mm,
United States could potentially hit 233 deaths by the end of this month. Right now, we are
jeez.
at 200 and more than 214,000.
Mhm.
I don't know how worse this could get.
Yeah.
A, if the president is reelected, and B, if the downplaying continues. How
Yeah.
concerned are you that the president is saying that he feels fantastic and there's still downplaying of this?
Yeah, it's so devastating. I think, and here's the reason why is it's yes, the mounting death toll is horrifying, but the other thing too is until this country gets a handle on this virus and gets a mature approach to it, people's lives will be kept on hold, schooling will be interrupted, mental health will continue to get worse. So there's other communities and societies that have managed to get their life back on track because they've had a mature response to the virus. So
Mhm.
the longer we're going to play like little children in the playground with this virus and with this absolute immature monstrosity at the helm, um, the US is going to continue to suffer direct and indirect morbidity and mortality from this virus.
One of the stories that I've been following on for this show is schools. And
Mm,
some schools are, even in Georgia, and now we have new reporting as of this week of Illinois, concealing their outbreaks, not releasing
mm.
them to the public. Are you concerned that more kids will be pulled out, or are you just concerned that that will cause more cases to rise and they'll just be kept secret?
Oh my God, that it's funny. I didn't actually know that, and
Mhm.
that is devastating. And I think isn't it criminal?
Yeah. I
Isn't that
mean,
criminal?
we
Yeah.
reached out to the Georgia Department of Health's office. They
Mm,
said they didn't get back to us yet.
mm.
But when I read the article by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, they said that they're referring to the outbreaks as quote investigations end
Oh
quote.
my
So
God, that's
I guess they're trying to wrap a legal term around it to conceal those outbreaks. So what do you make of that?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I would think a class action lawsuit could be brought
Yeah.
against these districts where they're withholding essential public health information from parents and children. Um, we have to be able to claim and look those numbers right in the eye because until we know the numbers, we don't know the epidemiology. We have to know the trends so that, whether or not schools are temporarily shut, whether or not kids are pulled out, it's an essential part of the contact tracing as well. Kids and their parents have to know when there has been a case or two reported in a classroom
Mhm.
so that they can isolate, they can test, etc. It's public health 101. And that is being broken is dangerous
I
and
agree.
reckless. Mhm.
Another thing that schools are doing is some school districts are releasing the information, but they are not releasing the information about individual schools, which is essentially
Mm.
making it more difficult for parents to understand if their child has an outbreak. if we can't get this under control, are you concerned about the fall? As you concerned, are you concerned
Mm.
about moving into the winter with the flu season and the pandemic?
Oh my gosh, and that's a whole other thing, and especially because I'm back actually in Toronto, and I'm sort of, as a family physician, I'm basically at the front lines of figuring out who needs to go to school, who needs to stay home from school, and then when
Hmm.
flu comes along, um, so there has to be complete transparency, because then medical professionals like us, we can't do our job if we don't know where the virus is concentrating. We have to also understand where the flu rates are coming up. We need complete epi transparency here to be able to
Mm.
do our jobs and keep people safe, and keep the virus contained as much as possible.
Earlier this week, there was a shocking report from the New York Times that the White House blocked CDC guidance on public transformation. Excuse me, on public transportation. The White House blocked that guidance. The CDC was essentially advising people to wear masks on planes and while traveling. Are you concerned about that? And how does that make you feel as a
Oh my
medical
gosh.
professional?
Yeah, I mean, basically there's a gag order on the CDC, and it seems that
Hmm.
any reasonable scientist at the CDC or epidemiologist has been gagged, and essentially the White House has kind of taken over control of the reporting. So essentially, the CDC is not a reliable source for information anymore,
Hmm.
and that is terrifying. We
Yes,
don't have a compass.
most definitely.
Mhm.
The president here, Twitter actually blocked the president earlier this week for spreading misinformation on his account. And the president does have millions and millions of followers. Are you concerned that that message will be amplified by his supporters all over the country and refusing to do what is medically necessary to keep others safe?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And this being this ridiculous election circus, is everything now is for votes.
Hmm.
And people don't understand they're being pawns in the game of essentially somebody's attempts to get reelected just because a failed businessman is in huge debt and needs the money. And
Hmm.
I don't think Americans understand that they're tools of manipulation when they're spreading these when they're spreading these tweets. They're just aiding this extremely dangerous person who history will look back on and say this was sort of the the Nazi regime of our time. And it seems
Hmm.
inciting to say it in those terms, but history will look back on this time and everybody who supported this regime as incredibly threatening to the human race.
Yes. I have not. I have seen pictures and videos of people dying in hospitals from the coronavirus, but I have not physically been in that presence or experienced that. As a medical professional, I know that they are alone. They do not have any family members. Is that lonely and is that scary? Looking at it from your point.
Yeah, it's a death without dignity.
Mm,
Um, when I saw folks coming in April, and again, I don't imagine death from COVID has changed at all. Folks already were behind the eight ball in terms of being marginalized in society and marginalized from resources, and they would come in with their cell phone. And
mm,
they'd be in the emergency department, struggling to breathe, having a conversation with their loved one,
mhm,
and as their oxygen saturation would be dropping and we'd be saying, you need to be intubated,
mm,
I knew that conversation over the phone would be the last conversation they would have with a loved one. They would tell me, oh, here's my brother, just make sure you contact him. And I knew that that was the last conversation that he would have. I knew that was the conversation with me would be the last human person that they would contact.
mm,
Not only is it death without dignity, it is incredibly scary. It's lonely. And to be cut off from the people that you love at the final hours of your life, to only have people with masks and visors and gowns around you, and the
mhm,
beep, beep, beeping of machines, and seeing somebody else being resuscitated without success in a bed beside you and dead bodies around you,
mhm.
it's a war zone.
Yeah.
It's nothing short of a war zone. If I can paint a small picture of what I saw it was like to die of COVID, that's what it looks and sounds like.
Mm. I've seen medical professionals all over the country describe those scenes to other people. But as far as a political standpoint, I'm just not able to comprehend why leaders, while some leaders are not amplifying that message to their supporters and taking it seriously, the president is now officially getting ready to hold more new rallies after only I don't think he's fully been quarantined. Yesterday he was heard coughing on an interview with a reporter. I
Yeah, he's still shedding virus, my friends.
Mhm.
Absolutely. He's still infectious.
The president has received lots of experimental drug treatments. Are you concerned that he is still ill? And what should we do as a country? I mean, how should we feel as a country knowing that if the president, 'cause there's been lots of talk about the 25th Amendment. How should we feel as a country if the president is still
Mm.
ill?
Hmm. Unfortunately, I fear that this guy is just more dangerous alive than dead. And I hate to be nasty about it, but the thing is he's still shedding virus, but he has had the remdesivir and the monoclonal antibodies. So symptomatically, he's made a faster recovery because of all the access that ordinary Americans don't get.
Mhm,
However, we know he's still shedding virus. If he were incapacitated, I mean, to be honest, I don't. Unfortunately, evil never dies. I don't think he's going to be incapacitated. I don't know. I don't want to be wishing ill will.
mhm,
But as one Toronto reporter for Al Jazeera said, um, this is not a time to say that I don't wish. I don't wish him well on November 3rd. I don't wish him well at all.
mhm.
Um, he needs to be brought down. He stands for hatred. He stands for exclusion. He stands for the disruption of our civilization as we know it and human compassion. So I wish his downfall on November 3rd.
As we are now 25 days, I believe it's 24 days to the presidential election.
Mm,
We have seen this culminated effort by Democratic nominee Joe Biden, who is
mm,
now willing to who has always been willing to wear his mask, and he's sort of been mocked by it for the president. He is amplifying this message, and he's getting lots of political support and bipartisan support.
mhm.
If there were to be a Biden presidency, do you think we could potentially get this outbreak under control, get these outbreaks?
That's a really good question. I fear that there's been some irreparable damage because the message, the tone has sort of introduced so much disruption and so much doubt that nobody knows what's real and fake anymore in terms of news. We've been so divided. I think that the message, the ship would start, the tide would start to turn. But the problem is that I think Biden would be in conflict with all the governors that have sided with Trump, and
Mhm,
there would still be a distorted message. So I think states like New York would do well because the message, the federal and the state message would be aligned.
mhm.
But it's going to take years to correct the damage and the mistrust of science,
Yeah.
the inability to listen to folks who've actually trained their whole lives and careers to give accurate news and advice. And that is damage that may be 10, 15 years out in correcting.
Mm. How do you feel about the current stage of the pandemic? More than 214,000 Americans are dead, more than 7 million cases and rising. One of the opening analogies that I use for the show is how the Brazilian president, when he caught the coronavirus, he was downplaying it before he caught it. Then, after he caught it, he continued to downplay it, essentially saying that he knew he was going to catch it someday. And yeah.
Oh, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah, it's absolutely unfathomable.
Yeah. How do you feel about our
No, that's
current
true.
how do you feel about the status quo and where we can potentially progress as a nation in getting this under control?
Um, to understand that this virus is one of the largest threats to not only our health, but our well-being, our mental well-being, our economic well-being, and that the really tricky thing about this virus is that it has laid bare that certain people enjoy good health and certain
Mhm,
people don't, and that it lays bare also the inequity, the deep inequity in our society. And so our approach has to acknowledge that some people will not even have symptoms when they catch this virus. Some people will have mild symptoms and some people will die. Some
mhm,
people will be long haulers and experience COVID symptoms for months or years to come. So the deep compassion that it takes to understand that this virus is very sneaky and manipulative, and it'll affect people disproportionately. Unlike influenza tends to have quite a uniform, certainly it attacks vulnerable folks more, but
Hmm.
across society, influenza does tend to sort of enact the same kind of symptom spectrum. COVID makes some of us believe that we are superior because we've had a less response to it. And therefore, it outlines our inequity.
Mm.
So I believe the time is now to understand it's time to fundamentally look at the way that we treat people across society, to look at the caste system that we practice, and to understand that the measure of our society is how we take care of the weakest and most vulnerable in our society. And if
Mm.
there's one lesson to learn from COVID, if there's one way that we can actually beat this virus down, it is to understand that equity in society, access to healthcare and access to nutrition, exercise, and good health is everyone's fundamental right.
Mm. Once again, my guest is Dr. Anna Stratis. Dr. Stratis, thank you so much for coming on the show. I always appreciate your perspective on these things.
Jeremiah, thank you so much.
Thank you.